The notice was taped right to the front gate, bright orange, bold, ugly letters. Non-compliant structure, action required. Jacob stood still, mug of black coffee in hand, staring at it as if the paper might vanish if he blinked hard enough. It didn't. The HOA had struck again. He wasn't part of the homeowners association, not officially. His ranch sat just outside the newly built subdivision, a slice of open land and rusted fence lines surrounded by manicured lawns and boxy million-dollar homes that all looked like they were stamped from the same lifeless mold. For years, no one had bothered him. Until now. You ever wonder what happens when a quiet man gets pushed too far? Stick around. This is the story of how I went from being that weirdo with the barn to the man who ruined their perfect little development. And if you hate power-tripping HOA drama queens as much as I do, hit that like, maybe even subscribe, because it gets real. It started slow. A passive-aggressive note tucked under his windshield wiper. Your property reflects poorly on the neighborhood. Then came a formal letter, stamped and signed by the HOA president, Michelle Latham. She introduced herself in that overly polite way some people do when they're about to insult you. Jacob ignored it. He had fences to mend, horses to feed. He wasn't a recluse, just a man who didn't care for small talk or suburban politics. His ranch house was older than any home on the next street over. It had character, history. His father built that place with his bare hands, and Jacob had no intention of replacing the wood paneling with beige vinyl siding just to make some HOA queen happy. But Michelle wasn't the kind of woman who took no for an answer. She came herself the next afternoon, her black SUV crunching up his gravel drive like it had business being there. She didn't knock. She stood near the barn, arms crossed, designer sunglasses shielding her eyes, clipboard in hand like she was inspecting a crime scene. This structure, she said, gesturing toward his red-painted barn, doesn't meet aesthetic guidelines. Jacob looked up from the hay bale he'd been shifting. Good thing I'm not part of your HOA then. Her smile was tight. Technically, no, but your property borders ours and we've had several complaints. From who? She hesitated. We don't name residents, but it's about property values. He wiped sweat from his brow. Barn's been here longer than your whole damn development. Yes, well, times change. Perhaps you could consider updating it? The faded paint, the old signage, the rustic feel, it sends the wrong message. What message is that? She sniffed. Neglect. He set the hay bale down harder than he needed to. Lady, that barn's got better bones than half the prefab houses your HOA shoved into this county. Michelle stepped back slightly. I'm simply here to request cooperation. We can provide contractor recommendations. Paint palettes. Not interested. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. Well, then I'm afraid we'll have to explore other options. He raised an eyebrow. That a threat? No, she said, turning toward her SUV. Just a promise of progress. By the end of the week, the county inspector showed up. Not just once, 3 times. Noise complaints followed. Phantom barking from a dog Jacob didn't even have. Code violations for fence height. Trash ordinances. Suddenly, a property that had stood quietly for 40 years was a magnet for scrutiny. The strangest thing? Every time Jacob tried to call the county office, he was met with vague responses. Anonymous tips. Standard procedure. But it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Michelle wasn't just running an HOA. She was waging a campaign. She wanted him gone. Then on a rainy Thursday morning, Jacob noticed the men in suits walking the property line next to his ranch. He watched from his porch as they pointed, measured, scribbled notes on clipboards. A real estate agent's SUV idled by the curb, hazard lights blinking. Curiosity piqued, Jacob slipped on his boots and approached. One of the men, tall, wiry, hair too perfect, turned with that polished realtor smile. Good morning, sir. Beautiful property you've got here. Jacob crossed his arms. What's going on over there? Oh, adjacent lots being prepped for sale. Prime spot, we think. HOA's been eyeing it for a while. Might become the new clubhouse. Jacob's brow furrowed. Clubhouse? Yep. Pool, tennis court, Whole 9 yards. Anchor point for the whole development. Huge value booster. Jacob glanced at the worn "For Sale" sign by the road, half concealed by overgrown grass. He hadn't noticed it before. Who owns it? Private seller. Probate situation. Should be on the market officially by Monday. Probably won't last long. Jacob didn't say another word. He turned, walked back inside, and closed the door behind him. The rain picked up, drumming steady against the tin roof. He didn't move for a long time, because now he wasn't just some man holding on to a piece of the past. Now he had a plan. Jacob didn't sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the rain-slick listing he'd printed from the county website. Parcel 482-C, 5 acres of undeveloped land pressed tight against his property. According to the fine print, the sale was being handled by a probate attorney on behalf of the deceased owner's estate. The asking price? High, but not absurd. He'd need to move fast. At 7:02 a.m., he called the number. At 7:47, he was in his truck driving toward the attorney's office 2 towns over. By 8:30, he was sitting across from a man in a beige suit with coffee-stained fingers and tired eyes. "You're the first to call," the man said, flipping through a folder. "Technically, the listing isn't even live yet." "I'm not here to browse," Jacob said. "I'm here to buy." The lawyer blinked. "All cash?" Jacob reached into his coat pocket and laid out 3 bank statements and a certified pre-approval from the local credit union. "I've been saving for a new tractor," he said. "Guess I'll settle for dirt." By 10:15, he'd signed the initial agreement. By noon, the deposit was wired. The full transaction would clear within 10 business days. When Jacob walked back onto his land that afternoon, it was with a silent weight of certainty. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. Not the clerk at the feed store, not the mailman who always waved from his bicycle, and certainly not Michelle Latham. He just waited. 4 days later, a flyer appeared in every mailbox on Ridgewood Lane. It was glossy, full color, stamped with the HOA's emblem and that nauseating tagline, "Modern Living with Community Values." Right there, in the center fold, was a 3D rendering of the future Ridgewood clubhouse. Poolside cabanas, yoga studio, a 2-story glass gym. "Coming soon to parcel 482-C. Construction begins this fall." Jacob laughed when he saw it, a dry, humorless chuckle that scraped the back of his throat. He folded the flyer in half and stuck it under a magnet shaped like a horseshoe. That same evening, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mr. Palmer," a familiar voice said when he answered. "This is Michelle Latham. I was hoping we could discuss a few community matters. Perhaps over coffee?" "No need," Jacob replied. "I'm more of a bourbon kind of man." She paused. "Ah, well, there's been a slight misunderstanding about the parcel next to your property." "No misunderstanding on my end. I believe you might be under the impression that your recent purchase has no impact on the Ridgewood development. However, the HOA board had plans." "Let me stop you there," Jacob said. "Plans are just paper. Ownership is fact. And the fact is, I own that land now." Silence. "I see," she said at last. "Well, perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I already have," he said. "Have a good night, Miss Latham." The fallout was almost immediate. Within 48 hours, HOA board members began knocking on his door. First with polite smiles, then with increasingly forced ones. They offered to buy the land at a markup, offered inclusion into the HOA, even hinted at incentives if he'd let them break ground on just a portion. Jacob declined every time, politely, firmly, and when they finally sent a lawyer to his porch, he handed them a folder with a certified survey, mineral rights statement, and a copy of the HOA bylaws, which clearly stated the association had no jurisdiction beyond its original subdivision lines. Then he closed the door. That Saturday, he pulled his old truck around to the front edge of the new property and hammered in a post. Nailed a freshly painted sign to it in thick black letters. "Private property. No trespassing coming soon. The Old Stable Cafe." He'd had the idea late one night. A small cafe and farm stand, built in the style of his barn, serving fresh eggs, coffee, and smoked meats. Just a few tables, a screened porch. Nothing fancy, but with a direct view of the HOA's main walking trail, which now ended awkwardly at a tall metal fence he'd installed the day before. By Monday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Some called it petty, others called it genius. But no one could deny what had happened. Jacob Palmer had bought the land out from under them, and now he was building something of his own. Michelle showed up uninvited that evening, wearing heels entirely unsuited for gravel. Jacob saw her coming from the porch but didn't rise. She stopped at the new gate, jaw clenched. "You think this is clever?" "No," he said. "I think it's fair." She stepped closer. "You're turning this into a circus. People are confused. There's talk of protests." He sipped his coffee. "You're welcome to protest, long as you stay on your side of the fence. I'll have the county look into your permits. There are zoning restrictions." Jacob stood now, walked slowly to the gate. "You brought this on yourself, Michelle. I asked for peace. You brought war, and now you're mad I won." Her voice wavered. "You didn't win. You just disrupted things." "That's how change starts," he said, "with disruption." For a moment, she looked almost human. The mask of control cracked just slightly. "You'll regret this," she said. Jacob smiled, wide and unbothered. "Maybe, but at least I'll regret it on my own land." By the time the cafe's frame started going up, Ridgewood Lane had split in two. On one side were the purists, Michelle's loyalists, the ones who clung to their newsletters and bylaws like scripture, who believed uniformity was safety and any deviation was decay. They muttered when they passed Jacob's property, complained in online forums, and whispered about property values like it was a moral failing. But then there were the others, the quiet ones, families tired of HOA micromanagement, retirees who missed real conversations over synthetic landscaping, young couples who liked the smell of firewood and the look of real wood beams instead of fiberglass columns. These people started to nod at Jacob as they drove by. One even dropped off a pie. Michelle, of course, doubled down. She called for an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers were distributed, accusing Jacob of endangering community harmony and circumventing civic responsibility. She even tried to organize a petition to have his construction halted, pending further review. It failed, barely, but she didn't stop. Then she escalated. 2 nights after the cafe sign went up, Jacob returned from the supply store to find his fencing ripped out. Not the old fencing around the ranch, the new one. The tall, black-coated posts that lined the cafe's property line, separating it from Ridgewood's manicured path. It wasn't subtle. The wire was yanked and coiled into a messy pile, posts uprooted. Someone had clearly used a truck and chains. Jacob stood in the headlights of his own vehicle, fists tight, jaw locked. He didn't call the police. He didn't shout. He just walked the perimeter in silence, flashlight beams sweeping slowly, carefully. And then he noticed the tire tracks. Narrow, deep, curving into the brush. SUV, high clearance, heavy tread. He didn't need a license plate. He already knew. The next morning, he filed a police report. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make it official. Then he visited the hardware store, bought cameras, solar lights, reinforced locks. He didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because he was done letting it slide. The cameras caught her 3 days later. Michelle, dressed in all black, like some suburban ninja, creeping along the edge of the property line with what looked like wire cutters in hand. She wasn't alone. A younger man, HOA board member, if Jacob recalled correctly, kept watch by the trail entrance. They didn't make it far. The footage was crystal clear. Faces, tools, the moment the beam of the floodlight caught them mid-step. Michelle's jaw dropped. The man swore and dropped the cutters. Then they ran. Jacob didn't chase them. He didn't even leave the porch. He just saved the footage and made 3 copies. He waited a week before releasing it. Not online, not to the police. He sent it directly to every homeowner on Ridgewood Lane. Unmarked envelope. USB inside. No note. Within 24 hours, the HOA's group chat exploded. Half the board resigned. Michelle tried to call an emergency meeting, but only 3 people showed up. Someone, no one admitted who, called the local paper. They didn't print names, but the article was clear. HOA president caught trespassing and vandalizing private property amid land dispute. By Friday, Michelle was gone. Her house listed for sale by owner. Curtains drawn. No goodbye. Construction continued. By the time the cafe opened, soft launch, no press. It already had regulars. Jacob didn't advertise, he didn't need to. Word of mouth spread faster than any flyer. He sold strong coffee, fresh eggs, apple butter, and on weekends smoked brisket sandwiches that made people forget they ever cared about lawn height restrictions. People came, talked, sat on the porch, watched the sun go down behind the old ridge. Even the ones who had once signed Michelle's complaints now lingered longer. They brought folding chairs, asked questions. A few even apologized. Jacob never gloated. He didn't hang the footage, didn't mention the fence. He just poured coffee and smiled. One afternoon, a woman in her 30s, young, sharp, came by with her daughter. "We used to be afraid of this place," she admitted. "Michelle said you were a threat to the community." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "And now?" The woman looked around, at the wildflowers along the path, at the kid feeding a goat near the fence. "Now I think maybe you were the community." But Ridgewood Lane still had one last card to play, an anonymous complaint, this time to the county health board. Noise violations, livestock too close to food prep, unlicensed structure, too many vehicles parked on non-designated land. The inspector came on a Wednesday, tall, sunburned, clipboard in hand. He was polite, professional, thorough. Jacob walked him through every inch, showed him the permits, the grease traps, the animal enclosures spaced 20 feet further than regulation required. The inspector checked each box one by one. When he was done, he looked up and said, "To be honest, Mr. Palmer, this is one of the cleanest setups I've seen all year." Jacob nodded. "Appreciate that." The man hesitated. "Mind if I ask, why all the trouble?" Jacob looked out over the fence line, toward the rows of near-identical rooftops. "Because sometimes you got to remind people that roots run deeper than concrete." Late summer brought longer days and the kind of dry heat that curled the edges of porch flyers and made every iced tea taste like salvation. Business at the cafe was steady now. Jacob had added a second picnic table near the oak trees, and a high school kid named Marcus helped out on weekends for tips and fresh eggs. But Jacob knew better than to think peace had settled in for good. Not here. Not with the way some of the Ridgewood holdouts still glanced at his place from their SUVs like it was a rash on their otherwise perfect cul-de-sac. So when the black Escalade rolled past the cafe without stopping, windows tinted, moving just slow enough to show it was watching, he noticed. 3 days in a row, the same car. Never parked, never waved. Then came the lawyer's letter. It arrived by certified mail, heavy envelope, thick paper, a new name on the header, Eldridge Development Group. Inside, legal jargon wrapped around a threat. The company had purchased 5 undeveloped lots on the far edge of Ridgewood, just past Jacob's land. Their plan? A gated extension, luxury smart homes, private tennis court, and, once again, a clubhouse. This time larger, and they needed an easement. Right through Jacob's cafe driveway. No easement, no access, no construction. And they were prepared to negotiate generously, the letter said, but will pursue all legal avenues if necessary. Jacob leaned back in his chair, reread the letter and chuckled. So they'd brought in the big guns. That evening, he met with a lawyer of his own, Shelley Graves, 50-something, tough as fence wire. She reviewed the letter, grunted once, then pulled out a red pen. "They're bluffing," she said. "There's no existing utility right-of-way, no county claim. Your property line is clean. They want you to blink first." "What if I don't?" She looked up. "Then they have to spend months rerouting infrastructure, buying permits, negotiating with the county, all while bleeding interest payments." Jacob folded his arms. "Good." Shelley raised an eyebrow. You planning to fight them or make them pay through the nose? Jacob smiled. Both. The next week, he made a few upgrades. He paved the gravel portion of the cafe's drive, not to invite traffic, but to signal permanence. He added new signage, private entrance, no access to Ridgewood Extension. Then he planted a double row of pine saplings along the edge of the cafe lot, future living wall between him and the developers. And then, just to twist the knife, he added a chalkboard out front that read, "Try the brisket. It's more welcome than your HOA." Locals laughed. Some took photos. One woman posted it to a neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "He's not wrong." But Eldridge didn't laugh. They sued. The lawsuit claimed intentional obstruction of community development and failure to accommodate a reasonable access route in line with regional planning goals. Jacob framed the summons and hung it above the coffee counter. "Just a reminder," he told Marcus. "Some folks will do anything to mow down what they don't understand." Shelley filed the response within 72 hours. In it, she included satellite images, zoning records, and the HOA charter's own statements, all proving that Jacob's land had never been intended for shared infrastructure. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the developers sent agents. Not the suit-wearing kind, the whisperers, the ones who leaned in too close at the farmer's market, who happened to be driving by and asked casually if Jacob had considered the long-term hassle of fighting this thing. He didn't engage, but he watched. And one afternoon, he caught one of them sneaking behind the pine saplings with a measuring wheel and a camera. This time, he called the sheriff. The deputy was young but sharp. He reviewed the footage, nodded, and made a note. "Technically, it's trespassing," he said. "You want to press charges?" Jacob sipped his coffee. "Not yet. Let's see if they come back." They didn't. But a week later, a billboard appeared just beyond Jacob's pine trees on one of Eldridge's new lots. It showed a digital rendering of the development, all steel and glass, with the slogan, "The future begins at Ridgewood Extension." Right below it, in smaller font, "Pending access through Palmer Lot." Jacob laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. But things weren't just heating up in court. Inside the Ridgewood HOA, chaos had taken root. Without Michelle, the board had fractured. Some members wanted to align with Eldridge. Others feared backlash from the growing number of residents who now bought their eggs and coffee from Jacob every Saturday. 2 board members visited him, awkward and stiff. "We'd like to reopen talks," one said, "about maybe integrating your property into the HOA." Jacob didn't look up from the tomato vine he was staking. "Why would I want that?" "Well, we could potentially offer a grant for improvements, help with zoning headaches, a seat on the board." He stood. "Let me ask you something." The men straightened. "You come here because you like the coffee?" Sure, yeah." "Like the food?" "It's great." He gestured toward the picnic tables. "You see the people who come here? The ones smiling, laughing, not worrying about lawn edge regulations or mailbox heights?" They hesitated. "That's why I'll never be part of your HOA," he said, "because this place wasn't built to fit into your world. It was built for the folks who were never allowed in." The courthouse smelled like floor wax and stale air conditioning. Jacob sat at the defense table, suit jacket stiff on his shoulders, Shelley Graves flipping through notes beside him with a composure that felt like armor. Across the aisle, the Eldridge development team looked exactly like you'd expect. Polished, smug. One guy even had a Bluetooth earpiece still tucked in, like he might need to negotiate a yacht sale mid-hearing. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, called for opening statements. Eldridge went first. Their lead counsel spoke in smooth legalese, painting Jacob as a stubborn obstructionist, a lone holdout against progress, a man whose nostalgia for outdated aesthetics threatened to delay economic growth and community improvement. They spoke of access and connectivity like those words were sacred. Then it was Shelley's turn. She stood slowly, didn't raise her voice. "Your Honor," she began, "this is a simple matter of property rights. My client owns his land, outright and legally. The plaintiffs assumed access without asking. When denied, they attempted to use pressure, then escalation. This isn't about connectivity, it's about control. And my client has chosen to stand where so many are pressured to fold. The judge listened, expression unreadable. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Eldridge brought diagrams. Shelley brought receipts. And when the judge finally spoke, her voice was clear. There is no legal basis to compel Mr. Palmer to grant easement. This court upholds his right to manage his property as he sees fit within the bounds of county regulation. She banged the gavel once. It was over. Jacob didn't grin. He didn't gloat. He just exhaled. Later, outside the courthouse, Shelley clapped him on the back. They'll either have to build a bridge over your land or pay the county 6 figures to reroute. Either way, you win. He nodded. Didn't feel like a win. Just felt like not losing. She smiled. Sometimes that's enough. The billboard came down a week later. Quietly, no announcement. Eldridge pivoted, announcing their new vision, a smaller, slower expansion. No clubhouse, no direct trail. A redesigned plan that suddenly respected the natural landscape more. Jacob didn't care. He was too busy putting up wind chimes outside the cafe. Business was steady. He'd started selling fresh produce too. Tomatoes, zucchini, even handmade soap from a lady who lived 2 roads over. The porch got a fresh coat of paint. A group of local musicians asked to play on Saturdays. He said yes. People kept coming. One afternoon, Jacob found a boy, maybe 12, sketching the barn in a notebook, just sitting under the oak, legs crossed, focused. You like drawing? Jacob asked. The boy looked up, startled, nodded. My mom says your place looks like where her grandpa used to live. Jacob smiled. Think your mom wants some coffee? She did, and so it went, day after day. The cafe became less about coffee, more about community, not forced, not designed, just grown. 3 months later, the Ridgewood HOA voted to dissolve its current board. The new president? A retired school teacher who'd once picketed Jacob's fence. She stopped by the cafe after the vote, extended a hand. I didn't get it at first, she said. I do now. Jacob shook her hand. You don't have to get it, just respect it. She nodded. Fair enough. That winter, snow came early, thick, silent, heavy. Jacob stood on the porch, wrapped in his old army coat, watching it fall over both properties. The cafe, the ranch, the pine saplings now waist-high. Ridgewood's rooftops were just visible through the trees, softened by the white. The door creaked behind him. Marcus stepped out with 2 mugs. Busy day, the kid said. Jacob took one, nodded. The right kind. They stood in silence. Finally, Marcus asked, Do you think they'll try again? The HOA, Eldridge? Jacob sipped his coffee. Maybe. People like that don't go away. They just find new ways to press. So what do you do? Jacob looked out over the land. You hold the line, quietly every day, until they remember why the fence went up in the first place. Marcus nodded. A gust of wind whistled past the sign by the road. Faded now, but still standing. The old stable cafe built by hands, defended by heart. And Jacob smiled. Not because he'd beaten them, but because he was home. Spracete Chat GPT.